Jimmy Hoffa, the man who knew too much. The vanishing on July 30, 1975, a man stepped out of his home in suburban Detroit and disappeared forever. No struggle, no witnesses, no body. That man was Jimmy Hoffa, one of the most powerful union leaders in American history, a man who controlled millions of workers, billions of dollars, and had deep ties to organized crime. To some, he was a champion of the working class. To others, he was a dangerous liability who knew far too much. And to this day the question remains, what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Who was Jimmy Hoffa? James Riddle. Hoffa was born in 1913 in Indiana. His father died when he was young, forcing Hoffa to work early, and that shaped him. By his 20s, Hoffa had become deeply involved in labor unions, eventually rising through the ranks of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. The Teamsters represented truck drivers, and in the mid-20th century, truck drivers meant control of America's supply chain. By the 1950s, Hoffa was one of the most powerful men in the country. He negotiated massive contracts, improved wages, and won fierce loyalty from union members. But he also made enemies, very powerful ones. The mob connection. Hoffa's rise wasn't clean. The Teamsters pension fund, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, became a major source of loans for organized crime. Mob families used the money to build casinos in Las Vegas, finance construction projects, and expand criminal empires. In return, Hoffa received protection, political leverage, and silence. Some of the names connected to Hoffa include Russell Bufalino, Anthony Tony Provenzano figures. Tied to the Genovese and Detroit crime families, Hoffa insisted he wasn't controlled by the mafia. But federal investigators believed otherwise. The government versus Hoffa. Hoffa caught the attention of the U.S. government, especially Robert F. Kennedy. Kennedy saw Hoffa as the face of corruption in American labor unions. The two men became bitter enemies. After years of investigations, Hoffa was finally convicted in 1964 on charges of jury tampering and fraud. He was sentenced to prison. For many, that should have been the end of Jimmy Hoffa, but it wasn't. Prison, pardon, and revenge. In 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence, but there was a catch. Hoffa was banned from union leadership until 1980. Hoffa ignored that condition. He wanted his power back. He began contacting old allies and old enemies, trying to reclaim control of the Teamsters. And that's when people started getting nervous. Because Hoffa knew everything. Mob finances, political deals, pension fund secrets. And if he talked, a lot of powerful people would fall. The last day, on July 30, 1975, Hoffa told his wife he was meeting two men at the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. Those men were allegedly Tony Provenzano, Anthony Giacalone. Hoffa arrived. Witnesses saw him pacing in the parking lot. At 2:45 p.m., Hoffa made a phone call saying he'd been stood up. That was the last confirmed contact. His car was found, but Hoffa was gone. Theories of what happened. Theory 1. The Mafia hit. The most widely accepted theory is that Hoffa was lured to the meeting, killed shortly after, and his body disposed of, possibly cremated. Many believe the order came from mob leadership, who saw Hoffa as a liability. Theory 2. Buried under a stadium. One of the most famous rumors claims Hoffa is buried under Giants Stadium. The theory has been investigated and debunked, but it refuses to die. Theory 3. The Detroit disposal. Some believe Hoffa was taken to a mob-owned location in Detroit, murdered and destroyed in an industrial incinerator. No trace left behind. Theory 4. The FBI knows more. Others suspect the FBI knows exactly what happened, but revealing it would expose corruption they'd rather keep buried. Confessions and dead ends. Over the decades, multiple deathbed confessions have surfaced. Mob associates have claimed involvement. Searches have been conducted, dig sites investigated, and every single time, nothing. No body, no DNA, no proof. Jimmy Hoffa remains legally dead, but physically missing. The mob bosses who knew the truth, the men behind the curtain. When Jimmy Hoffa vanished in 1975, attention immediately turned to the mafia. Not because of rumors, not because of movies, but because Hoffa was deeply embedded in the mob's financial world. And by the end of his life, he had become a problem they could no longer control. This isn't a story about if the mafia was involved. This is the story of which men benefited most from Hoffa's silence. Russell Bufalino, the quiet kingmaker. Russell Bufalino was one of the most powerful and least flashy mob bosses in America. Head of the Bufalino crime family in Pennsylvania, he was known for operating behind the scenes, preferring influence over violence. Bufalino and Hoffa were extremely close. So close, in fact, that Bufalino attended Hoffa's son's wedding and served as a mentor figure. But loyalty in the mafia has limits. By the 1970s, Bufalino believed Hoffa had become reckless. Hoffa wanted his power back. He was talking too much. And worst of all, he refused to listen. According to multiple informants, Bufalino approved the final decision that Hoffa had to go. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. Anthony, Tony Provenzano, the enemy. If Bufalino was the strategist, Tony Provenzano was the hothead. A captain in the Genovese crime family, Provenzano had a long violent history with Hoffa. The two men hated each other. They clashed over union power, money, and respect, and their feud followed them all the way into prison, where they reportedly screamed threats at each other. Tony Pro had motive. He had connections, and he had a reputation for brutality. Many investigators believe Provenzano was supposed to attend Hoffa's final meeting, but backed out at the last minute to give himself plausible deniability. Even so, his name has never stopped circling the case. Anthony Giacalone, the Detroit Connection. Anthony Tony Jack. Giacalone was a high-ranking member of the Detroit Partnership, one of the most powerful crime organizations in the Midwest. Unlike Provenzano, Giacalone was calm, calculating, and respected. Witnesses placed Giacalone as one of the men Hoffa expected to meet the day he vanished. But Giacalone had an alibi. He claimed he was out of town at the time, and technically he was. Which raises a chilling possibility. What if Giacalone didn't need to be present? What if his role was simply to arrange the meeting, not attend it? Salvatore Sally Bugs Briguglio, the triggerman. If Hoffa was murdered, investigators believe Salvatore Briguglio may have been the man who carried it out. Briguglio was known as an enforcer, a man who handled problems. Multiple informants claimed Briguglio lured Hoffa into a car after the restaurant meeting. According to one version, Hoffa believed he was heading to a second meeting location. Instead, he was driven to his death. Briguglio was later murdered himself in 1978. Silenced. The Teamsters and mob money. The real reason Hoffa had to disappear wasn't personal, it was financial. The Teamsters pension fund had bankrolled Las Vegas casinos, major construction projects, organized crime expansion. Hoffa's return threatened that balance. Mob leadership feared he might expose loan arrangements, disrupt cash flow, or cooperate with authorities if pushed from their perspective. Hoffa wasn't just a problem, he was a risk. The disposal. Why no body was ever found. The mafia didn't just kill people, they erased them. The leading belief is that Hoffa's body was cremated, incinerated, or destroyed in an industrial facility. This wasn't about hiding a murder. It was about making sure no evidence could ever speak. The mob's perfect crime. Every mob figure connected to Hoffa is now dead. Every alleged witness is gone. Every confession came too late, or fell apart under scrutiny. And that may have been the plan all along. Jimmy Hoffa didn't just disappear. He was removed by men who understood power, loyalty, and silence better than anyone else. And as long as there's no body, the mob's greatest secret stays buried. The legacy of Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of power, corruption, loyalty, and fear. And perhaps that's why he was never meant to be found. Because if Jimmy Hoffa's body ever surfaced, it wouldn't just solve a mystery. It would reopen one of the darkest chapters in American history. So the question remains, did Jimmy Hoffa disappear, or was he erased?